It was just a joke. For words that keep replaying in my mind as I stare at the empty side of our bed. For stupid words that shattered my life into a million jagged pieces. I never thought a careless comment at a dinner party could destroy 8 years of marriage in less than 8 minutes. But that's exactly what happened. 3 weeks ago, I had everything: a beautiful home in the suburbs, a thriving career as an interior designer, and a husband I adored. James was my rock, my best friend, my forever person. At least that's what I thought until the night I made the joke that changed everything. It started like any other Saturday evening. James and I were hosting dinner for my longtime friend Vanessa and her husband Ethan. We'd been friends since college, and when she married Ethan 5 years ago, our friendship evolved into couples night every other weekend. The four of us got along wonderfully, sharing bottles of wine, exchanging stories, and laughing until our sides hurt. That night, we'd opened the expensive Cabernet we'd been saving for a special occasion. Not that there was anything particularly special about this dinner, but James had just received a promotion at his firm, and I wanted to celebrate. The food was delicious, the conversation flowed easily, and by our third glass of wine, we'd ventured into dangerous territory, the subject of marriage and how to keep things interesting after years together. Ethan surprised me with a weekend getaway last month, Vanessa gushed, her hand resting on her husband's arm. It was exactly what we needed to spice things up. I remember watching how Ethan looked at her, with such intensity and adoration. In that moment, I glanced at James, hoping to catch the same look, but he was focused on refilling his wine glass, seemingly disinterested in the conversation. "That sounds amazing," I said, feeling a pang of jealousy. James and I hadn't done anything spontaneous in months. Our routine had become predictable: wake up, work, dinner, television, sleep, repeat. James and I need to do something like that. James looked up at me with a half smile. Maybe next summer when things slow down at work. Next summer. Always putting things off until some distant future. It was a pattern I'd grown tired of, and perhaps that's why what happened next occurred. The wine had loosened my inhibitions, and a dangerous thought formed in my mind. Or maybe, I said with a laugh, raising my glass, we should just swap husbands for a weekend. You know, Vanessa gets James, I get Ethan. That would definitely spice things up. The silence that followed was deafening. Vanessa's eyes widened in shock before she forced an uncomfortable laugh. Ethan nearly choked on his wine. But it was James's reaction that chilled me to the bone. His face hardened, all emotion draining away as he placed his glass down with deliberate slowness. "That's not funny, Claire," he said, his voice quiet but razor-sharp. "Oh, come on," I tried to backpedal, realizing my mistake too late. "It was just a joke. I didn't mean anything by it." But the damage was done. Something had shifted in James's eyes, a light had gone out, replaced by a coldness I'd never seen before. The rest of dinner was excruciating, with stilted conversation and long, uncomfortable silences. Vanessa and Ethan left early, making vague excuses about a babysitter, though their kids were spending the night at Ethan's mother's house. As soon as the door closed behind them, James turned to me. "What the hell was that about?" he asked, not yelling, which somehow made it worse. His calm demeanor terrified me more than any shouting match could have. "It was just a stupid joke," I repeated, desperately trying to erase the last hour. "I had too much wine." "You know I would never?" "Would you never?" he interrupted, studying my face as if seeing me for the first time. "Because jokes like that usually come from somewhere, Claire. Is there something you want to tell me? Something about Ethan, perhaps?" "What?" "No." I was horrified. "There's absolutely nothing between Ethan and me. I don't even think of him that way." "But you've thought about swapping?" James pressed, his voice growing colder with each word. "Is our marriage so boring to you that you need to fantasize about trading me in?" "That's not what I was doing," I protested, tears forming in my eyes. "It was a thoughtless comment. I didn't mean it." James shook his head, turning away from me. 8 years together, and I never thought I'd hear something like that from you. Do you have any idea how humiliating that was? To sit there while my wife suggests trading me to her friend like I'm some kind of commodity. His words struck me like physical blows. I reached for him, but he stepped back. I need some air, he said, grabbing his keys from the counter. James, please, I begged, panic rising in my chest. Don't leave like this. Let's talk about it. I can't talk to you right now, he replied, his hand on the doorknob. I don't even know who you are anymore. The door closed behind him with a soft click that seemed to echo through our empty house. I stood frozen in the hallway, unable to process what had just happened. It was just a joke, a stupid, thoughtless joke that I would give anything to take back. I didn't know it then, but that moment was just the beginning of my nightmare. The joke that would cost me everything. And as I sat alone in our kitchen, surrounded by the remnants of our dinner party, I had no idea that James wouldn't be coming home that night. Or the night after. Or that 3 weeks later, I'd still be sleeping alone, wondering if my marriage was over because of a thoughtless word spoken after too much wine. If you've ever made a mistake that spiraled out of control, destroying everything you hold dear, then you know the hollow feeling in my chest right now. The weight of regret is crushing me, and I'm desperate to fix what I've broken. But how do you repair trust once it's shattered? How do you convince someone you love that a single moment of stupidity doesn't define your entire relationship? I don't have the answers yet, but I'm determined to find them. Because I can't accept that one terrible joke could be the end of us. There has to be a way back from this. Before I continue, kindly subscribe to this channel. 3 days after the disastrous dinner party, I was sitting on our living room couch at 2 a.m., surrounded by darkness, when I heard his key in the lock. I'd been calling James incessantly since he left, my messages going from apologetic to desperate to angry and back again. He'd responded only once with a terse text, "I'm staying at Greg's. Need time to think." Greg was his college roommate who lived about 20 minutes away. I'd almost driven there a dozen times but always stopped myself. Forcing a confrontation would only push James further away. So instead, I waited, marinating in my guilt and fear, jumping at every sound outside our door. When he finally appeared in the doorway, the sight of him knocked the air from my lungs. He looked terrible, unshaven, dark circles under his eyes, wearing the same clothes he'd left in. But he was home, and relief flooded through me so intensely I felt lightheaded. "James," I whispered, afraid speaking too loudly might scare him away. "I'm so sorry." He stood just inside the doorway, keeping a deliberate distance between us. "I came to get some clothes," he said flatly. My momentary relief evaporated. "You're not staying." "I can't, Claire." "Not yet." He ran a hand through his disheveled hair. "Every time I close my eyes, I hear you making that joke, see you laughing about it, and I feel. I don't even have the words for what I feel." I rose from the couch, taking a tentative step toward him. It was a stupid, thoughtless comment. It meant nothing. "See, that's the problem," he said, his voice gaining an edge. "If it meant nothing, why say it? Why even think it?" "I don't know," I admitted, tears forming. Maybe I was trying to be provocative or funny. Maybe I was jealous of Vanessa talking about their weekend away. James stared at me, his expression unreadable. "So your solution was to suggest we swap partners? Do you have any idea how that made me feel? Like I'm interchangeable. Replaceable." "You're not," I insisted. "You could never be replaced, James. I love you." "Do you?" he asked quietly. "Because I've been thinking about a lot of things these past few days. About us. About our marriage. And I realized this joke didn't come out of nowhere." My stomach clenched. "What do you mean?" He moved past me into the living room but remained standing, as if sitting would commit him to a longer conversation than he wanted. "When was the last time you looked at me the way Vanessa looks at Ethan? When was the last time we really connected, not just existed in the same space?" His question struck me like a physical blow. Had we really drifted that far apart without my noticing? "We've been busy," I said weakly. Work has been crazy for both of us. It's more than that, Claire. We stopped prioritizing each other. I'm as guilty of it as you are. But that joke. He shook his head. It made me wonder if you've been settling all this time. If I'm not enough for you anymore. That's not true, I protested, panic rising in my chest. It was one stupid comment. It doesn't define our marriage. Doesn't it though? James challenged, his eyes meeting mine. Because jokes like that don't come from nowhere. They reveal things we might not even admit to ourselves. I felt myself growing desperate. So what are you saying? You're leaving me over a joke. I'm saying I don't know who we are anymore, he replied, his voice breaking slightly. I don't know if what we have is even worth saving. His words cut through me like glass. 8 years together, reduced to this moment of doubt and pain. You don't mean that, I whispered, reaching for him. He stepped back, maintaining the distance between us. I need more time, Claire. I can't just pretend this didn't happen. Then don't, I said, suddenly finding my voice. Let's talk about it. Let's figure out why I said it, why it hurt you so badly. Let's fix what's broken instead of throwing it all away. Something flickered in his eyes, a softening, perhaps. He hesitated, then said, Vanessa called me yesterday. I froze. What? She wanted to make sure I was okay. She said Ethan was upset too, but they talked it through. Jealousy flared unexpectedly. While my marriage was imploding, Vanessa and Ethan had processed the incident and moved on. And now she was calling my husband? The irony wasn't lost on me. What else did she say? I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral. Jane sighed. She said they're not comfortable doing couple things with us for a while. That the dynamic feels compromised. The humiliation was complete. Not only had I damaged my marriage, but I'd also destroyed an important friendship. The consequences of my thoughtless words were spreading like ripples in a pond, disrupting everything they touched. James, please, I said, my voice breaking. Come home. Let's work through this together. He was quiet for a long moment, studying my face as if searching for something. Finally, he said, I'll sleep in the guest room tonight. I have an early meeting tomorrow. We can talk after I get back from work. It wasn't the reconciliation I'd hoped for, but it was something, a fragile thread of possibility that I clung to desperately. That night, lying in our bed alone, I could feel James's presence in the house, so close yet unreachable. The wall between us wasn't just physical, it was built of broken trust and wounded pride. I stared at the ceiling, replaying our conversation, wondering what he was thinking in the room down the hall. What I didn't know then was that James had already made a decision that would shatter what little hope I had left. The next day, when I returned from work eager to have our promised conversation, I found a note on the kitchen counter instead of my husband. Claire, it read in his precise handwriting, I've taken a temporary assignment in Chicago. 3 months minimum. I think we need this space to figure out if there's anything left to save. I'll call when I'm settled. And just like that, my husband was gone, not just to a friend's house this time, but to another city entirely. He'd chosen distance over dialogue, absence over resolution. The joke that was meant to last seconds had now stretched into a separation that could last months, or forever. As I slid down the kitchen wall, clutching his note to my chest, I realized the enormity of what I'd done. One careless moment had unraveled 8 years of love and trust. And I had no idea how to stitch it back together across the hundreds of miles he'd put between us. Before I continue, kindly subscribe to this channel. The first month without James was a blur of tears, sleepless nights, and unanswered phone calls. I left voicemails that grew increasingly desperate as days passed without response. I sent texts that showed as delivered but never read. The silence was deafening, a constant reminder of how thoroughly I'd broken something I thought was unbreakable. It's just a cooling off period, my sister Liv assured me over coffee 3 weeks into James's Chicago exile. Men need space to process. He'll come around. But her confident words couldn't erase the image burned into my memory, James's face when I'd made that stupid joke, the light dimming in his eyes as something fundamental shifted between us. Some wounds can't be healed with time and distance alone. I threw myself into work, taking on more clients than I could reasonably handle, staying at the office until security practically forced me to leave. Anything to avoid coming home to our empty house, where his absence screamed from every corner. The unwashed coffee mug he'd left in the sink the morning before the dinner party. His reading glasses on the nightstand. The indent in his pillow that was slowly disappearing, just like the man himself. 5 weeks after he left, James finally called. "Claire," he said, his voice distant and formal. "I wanted to check in." My heart hammered so hard I could barely hear him over the blood rushing in my ears. "James," I breathed, clutching the phone like a lifeline. "How are you? How's Chicago? When are you coming home?" Too many questions. I could feel him retreating even through the phone. "I'm fine," he replied after a pause. "The project is challenging but going well. As for coming home, I don't know yet." The crushing weight of uncertainty pressed down on my chest. "Can we talk about what happened? Really talk?" He sighed, the sound tinny through the connection. "That's why I called, actually. I've been seeing someone here." My world stopped. "What?" "Not like that," he clarified quickly. "A therapist. I've been trying to understand why your joke hit me so hard. Why I couldn't just let it go." Relief flooded through me, followed immediately by confusion. James had always rejected the idea of therapy, claiming it was not for him. What had changed? "That's good," I managed. "What have you discovered?" There was a long pause, filled only by the sound of his breathing. When he spoke again, his voice had changed, become smaller somehow. "My father left my mother for her best friend when I was 12. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. In 8 years of marriage, James had never once mentioned this. I knew his parents had divorced, but he'd always been vague about the details, changing the subject whenever it came up. "James, I had no idea," I whispered. "I never told you," he said flatly. "I never told anyone. It was humiliating. Everyone in our small town knew. Kids at school would ask if my mom was going to swap with anyone else. They made jokes about it. For years." Horror washed over me as understanding dawned. My thoughtless joke had unwittingly reopened a childhood wound I didn't even know existed. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" I asked, my voice breaking. "I buried it so deep I thought it couldn't hurt me anymore," he admitted. "I convinced myself it didn't matter. But when you made that joke, suddenly I was 12 years old again, watching my family fall apart because my father thought my mother was interchangeable." Tears streamed down my face. "James, I'm so sorry. If I had known." "But you didn't," he interrupted. "Because I never gave you the chance to know. That's what I'm learning in therapy. I've been keeping parts of myself locked away, even from you. Especially from you." A flicker of hope sparked in my chest. "Does this mean, are we working toward something? Reconciliation?" The silence that followed felt eternal. "I don't know yet," he finally said. "I'm doing this work for me, Claire. I need to understand why I shut down instead of telling you why that joke hurt. Why I run from conflict instead of facing it. I can't promise where this leads." It wasn't the answer I wanted, but it was honest. And honesty was a step forward from silence. "Can I come visit you?" I asked, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. "Just for a weekend. No pressure, no expectations. Just see each other." Another pause. "Not yet," he said gently. "I'm not ready." The rejection stung, but I forced myself to respect his boundary. "Okay. Will you at least call again?" "Keep talking." "I will," he promised. "Once a week. Sunday evenings." It wasn't enough, nowhere near enough, but it was something to cling to in the storm. After we hung up, I sat motionless on our bed, processing everything. All these years, I'd thought I knew James completely. Yet there had been this fundamental piece of his history, his pain, that he'd kept hidden from me. How well did I really know the man I'd married? That night, I couldn't sleep. Instead, I dug through our storage closet until I found our wedding album. Page after page of smiling faces, hopeful futures, promises made in white dresses and black tuxedos. I traced James's face in our photos, searching for signs of the hidden pain he carried. In one picture, taken during our first dance, I was looking up at him adoringly, but his eyes were distant, focused on something beyond the frame. Had he been there with me fully, even on our wedding day? Or had part of him always been that 12-year-old boy, afraid of being abandoned again? The next morning, I did something I never thought I'd do. I called and made an appointment with a therapist of my own. I need to understand why I would make a joke that could hurt someone I love, I told the receptionist. And I need to learn how to fix what I've broken. What I discovered in those first few therapy sessions shook me to my core. The reasons behind my careless joke were more complex than I'd realized, rooted in insecurities and patterns I'd been blind to. But the most shocking revelation came 3 weeks later, when I received an unexpected text from Vanessa that would change everything I thought I knew about my marriage. "We need to talk," she wrote. "It's about James. There's something you don't know." Before I continue, kindly subscribe to this channel. My hands trembled as I stared at Vanessa's text. What could she possibly know about James that I didn't? After 8 years of marriage, I thought I'd uncovered all his secrets, especially now that I knew about his parents' divorce. What else could there be? I called her immediately, my heart pounding against my ribs like a trapped bird. "Vanessa, what do you mean? What about James?" Her voice was hesitant on the other end. "Not over the phone, Claire. Can we meet? Coffee, maybe." Something in her tone sent ice through my veins. "Tell me now," I insisted, surprising myself with the steel in my voice. "I've been in hell for 6 weeks. Whatever it is, I can handle it." She sighed deeply. "Fine. But remember, I'm only telling you this because I care about both of you." A pause that stretched into eternity. 3 years ago, when you were in Boston for that design conference, James came to our house to drop off the birthday gift you'd bought for me. My mind raced, trying to recall. I'd been gone for 5 days that February, my longest trip away from home. I remembered asking James to deliver Vanessa's gift since I wouldn't be there for her birthday dinner. Ethan was working late, she continued, her voice smaller now. We had a couple of drinks and James broke down. Started crying. I'd never seen him like that before. "Crying? About what?" I pressed, confusion mounting. "About your marriage. About feeling like he wasn't enough for you." She took another deep breath. "He said you'd been distant, focused on your career. That he was afraid you were outgrowing him. He asked me if you ever talked about being unhappy with him." The revelation knocked the air from my lungs. 3 years ago, James had been harboring doubts about our marriage? He'd confided in Vanessa instead of me. "Why didn't you tell me this before?" I demanded, anger flaring alongside hurt. "He made me promise not to," she admitted. "He was embarrassed afterward. Said he'd had too much to drink and was just being insecure. The next day, he called and begged me to forget it happened. I thought he would talk to you himself eventually. But he never had. All this time, while I'd thought we were happy, James had been carrying this burden of doubt, this fear of inadequacy." "There's more," Vanessa said quietly. "When you made that joke about swapping, the way Ethan reacted wasn't just about the inappropriateness of it. It was because he knew about that night. About James's insecurities." The pieces suddenly clicked together with sickening clarity. My joke hadn't just triggered James's childhood trauma, it had confirmed his worst fears, that I didn't value him, that he was replaceable, that perhaps I really did want someone else. Oh my God, I whispered, sinking onto the kitchen floor. I had no idea. I know, Vanessa said gently. That's why I'm telling you now. When you made that joke, James looked at Ethan, and there was this moment of recognition between them. Like James thought his worst fears were being confirmed in front of the one person who knew about them. Double humiliation. Double betrayal. No wonder he'd left. After hanging up with Vanessa, I sat motionless for hours, replaying the last 3 years of our marriage through this new lens. Had I been distant? So focused on my flourishing career that I'd neglected James's emotional needs? The painful truth was that I couldn't confidently deny it. That night, I did something I hadn't done since college. I pulled out a notebook and wrote James a letter, not an email or a text, but an actual handwritten letter, pouring out everything in my heart without filters or fear. Dear James, I know about the conversation you had with Vanessa 3 years ago. I know you've been carrying doubts and insecurities about us, about my commitment to you, for longer than I ever realized. I'm writing this letter not to blame you for keeping these feelings from me, but to take responsibility for my part in creating them. The truth is, I have been self-absorbed. I've taken our relationship for granted, assumed your love was unconditional and unshakable while I pursued everything else that mattered to me. I never stopped to consider that you might be drowning in silence beside me. My joke about swapping wasn't just thoughtless, it was the culmination of years of me not seeing you, really seeing you. Not recognizing your need for reassurance, for prioritization, for the same level of passion and attention I give to my work. I understand now why you left. It wasn't just about the joke or your parents' divorce. It was about feeling invisible in your own marriage for too long. I don't know if we can fix what's broken between us. I don't know if you even want to try. But I want you to know that I see it all now, my neglect, your pain, our disconnection. And I am so deeply sorry. Whatever you decide, please know that this experience has changed me. Whether we find our way back to each other or not, I will never again make the mistake of taking love for granted. With all my heart. Claire. I mailed the letter the next morning, not expecting a response. This wasn't about getting him back, it was about acknowledging truths that had been buried for too long. A week passed. Then 2. Our scheduled Sunday calls continued, but they were stilted, surface level. I didn't mention the letter, and neither did he. I began to think he hadn't received it, or worse, had received it but decided not to acknowledge it. Then, on a rainy Tuesday evening as I was heating up yet another lonely microwave dinner, my doorbell rang. I opened it to find James standing on our porch, soaking wet, a small duffel bag at his feet. His eyes were red-rimmed, his face haggard with exhaustion. But he was here. Actually here. I got your letter, he said simply. My heart stuttered in my chest. You came back. He shook his head slightly. Not exactly. I came to talk. Face to face, finally. About everything. I stepped back to let him in, hope and fear battling within me. This wasn't a reunion, it was a reckoning. And as James crossed the threshold into the home we'd once shared without hesitation, I realized this conversation would determine whether we had any future together at all. What I didn't know, couldn't have known, was that James had brought with him a decision that would force me to make the hardest choice of my life. A proposition that would test the very limits of my love and commitment in ways I never imagined possible. Before I continue, kindly subscribe to this channel. James sat across from me at our kitchen table, the same place where we'd shared thousands of meals, celebrated birthdays, and made plans for a future that now hung by a thread. His hair was longer than when he'd left, and there was a new weariness in his eyes that broke my heart. The physical distance of Chicago had carved itself into his features, aging him in ways I couldn't have imagined. I've been doing a lot of thinking, he said, wrapping his hands around the mug of coffee I'd made him. His wedding ring was still on his finger, a small detail that sent hope fluttering through my chest. About us. About why we ended up here. I nodded, not trusting my voice. The letter I'd written lay on the table between us like a confession. You were right, he continued, his eyes meeting mine. I've been keeping things from you. Not just about my parents, but about my fears. My insecurities. I convinced myself that being the strong, silent type was what a husband should be. That my doubts were mine to carry alone. And I let you, I whispered. I didn't notice you were drowning. A sad smile touched his lips. We both made mistakes, Claire. But that joke. He shook his head, the pain still fresh in his expression. It confirmed every fear I'd been harboring for years. That I wasn't enough. That you were settling. That given the choice, you'd prefer someone else. That's not true, I insisted, reaching across the table on impulse. He didn't pull away when I touched his hand, and that small victory felt monumental. James, that joke came from a place of, I don't even know. Boredom? Restlessness? It wasn't about wanting Ethan or anyone else. It was about feeling like we'd lost our spark. He nodded slowly. My therapist suggested something similar. That maybe your joke was a misguided attempt to shock us out of complacency. To get my attention. Is that what you believe? I asked, hardly daring to breathe. His eye searched mine. I want to. But the truth is, Claire, I don't know if I can ever unhear those words. Ever forget how easily they came to you, how casually you suggested replacing me. My heart sank. So where does that leave us? James took a deep breath. That's why I came back. To give you a choice, the same choice I've been grappling with for weeks. He pulled an envelope from his jacket pocket and placed it on the table. My name was written on the front in his familiar handwriting. What is this? I asked, my fingers hovering over it. 2 options, he said quietly. The first is divorce papers. Clean, simple, no drawn-out battle. I'll give you the house. We'll divide assets fairly. The word divorce hit me like a physical blow, knocking the air from my lungs. Despite everything, I'd never truly believed we would end. And the second option. I managed to ask through the tightness in my throat. A new beginning, he said. But not here. Not in this house with all its memories and patterns. The project in Chicago has been extended to a year minimum. They've offered me a permanent position if I want it. Understanding dawned slowly. You want me to move to Chicago? I want us to start over, he clarified. In a new city where we're not surrounded by reminders of what went wrong. Where we can build something different. Something better. Leave everything? I whispered, my mind racing through the implications. My thriving business with local clients I'd spent years cultivating. My sister who lived 10 minutes away. The house we'd poured our hearts into renovating. What about my work? My family? That's the choice, Claire, he said, his voice gentle but firm. I need this fresh start. I can't heal here, where every dinner party, every social gathering with friends feels loaded with potential landmines. Where I see Vanessa and Ethan at the grocery store and feel humiliated all over again. I stared at him, this man I'd loved for a decade, trying to process the magnitude of what he was asking. This feels like an ultimatum. It is, he admitted without apology. I've spent 2 months in therapy understanding my part in our breakdown. I've faced my childhood trauma, my communication failures, my tendency to shut down instead of speaking up. I've done that work. Now I need to know if you're willing to do yours. By giving up everything. I asked, a flicker of anger sparking through my grief. By proving that I'm your priority, he countered. That our marriage matters more than your comfort zone. That you're willing to sacrifice for us the way I've sacrificed my pride by coming back at all. His words landed like a challenge, and I found myself speechless. Part of me wanted to argue that love shouldn't require such dramatic gestures, that healthy relationships don't demand sacrificing one person's dreams for another's. But another part, the part that had been attending therapy sessions and confronting hard truths, recognized the validity of his need. How long do I have to decide? I asked finally. A week, he said. I fly back to Chicago on Tuesday. You either come with me, or we file the papers. He stood then, picking up his duffel bag. I'm staying at the Marriott downtown. I'll give you space to think. You're not staying here? I asked, unable to mask my disappointment. He shook his head. This isn't a reconciliation yet, Claire. It's a crossroads. We both need clarity to make the right choice. After he left, I sat motionless at the kitchen table, staring at the envelope he'd left behind. I couldn't bring myself to open it, to see the divorce papers that might end our story forever. Instead, I did what I'd been learning to do in therapy. I sat with my emotions, letting them wash over me without judgment. Fear of losing James permanently. Anger at being forced to choose. Guilt over the joke that had started this landslide. Hope that we might still find our way back to each other. Grief for the life I might have to leave behind. That night, I called my sister Liv, pouring out everything through tears and hiccuping breaths. He's punishing you, she said immediately, protective anger in her voice. Making you give up everything because his feelings got hurt? That's emotional manipulation. But was it? Or was James simply acknowledging a hard truth, that sometimes saving something valuable requires painful sacrifice? The next morning, I drove to my office and looked around at the space I'd built from nothing. Photos of successful projects lined the walls. My design award sat proudly on shelves. This business was part of my identity, the culmination of years of hard work and dedication. Could I walk away from it all for a man who might still decide I wasn't worth the effort? For a marriage that might be too broken to fix? As I sat at my desk contemplating the impossible choice before me, my phone buzzed with a text from an unexpected source, Ethan. 3 simple words that would completely upend my decision and reveal a truth about James that I never could have anticipated. We need to talk. I met Ethan at a quiet coffee shop downtown, far from our usual haunts where we might run into mutual friends. When I arrived, he was already seated in a corner booth, nervously turning his coffee cup between his hands. The moment he looked up and our eyes met, I knew whatever he had to tell me wasn't going to make my impossible choice any easier. Thanks for meeting me, he said as I slid into the seat across from him. I've been debating whether to reach out since everything happened. My stomach clenched with anxiety. Just tell me, Ethan. Whatever it is, I need to know. He took a deep breath, his usual confident demeanor replaced by something more hesitant. The job in Chicago. James didn't just stumble into it after your fight. He'd been interviewing for it since January. January. For months before my ill-fated joke. The timeline didn't make sense. That can't be right, I said, shaking my head. He never mentioned wanting to leave his firm here. He was just promoted. I know because I was his reference, Ethan admitted, guilt flashing across his face. He swore me to secrecy. Said he wasn't sure if he would take it, but wanted to explore his options. The betrayal cut deep. While I'd been agonizing over my careless words destroying our marriage, James had already been planning an escape route, long before the dinner party. Why are you telling me this now? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Ethan sighed. Because he's giving you an ultimatum based on a false premise. Making you believe his moving to Chicago was a direct response to your joke when he'd been laying the groundwork for months. Does Vanessa know? I asked, though I already suspected the answer. He nodded reluctantly. She's the one who encouraged me to tell you. She said if you're going to make a life-altering decision, you deserve all the facts. I sat back, trying to process this revelation. The narrative I'd accepted, that my thoughtless joke had sent my husband fleeing to another state, was only part of the truth. He'd been considering leaving long before those words ever left my mouth. There's more, Ethan said, his voice dropping lower. That night 3 years ago, when he came to our house, he didn't just talk about feeling inadequate in your marriage. He said he sometimes wondered if he'd made a mistake getting married so young, if he'd missed out on opportunities because he'd settled down in his 20s. Each word was another crack in the foundation of what I thought I knew about my marriage. James had presented himself as the wounded party, the one whose trust had been irrevocably broken by my careless joke. But he'd been harboring doubts, significant doubts, for years. Why didn't he ever talk to me about any of this? I asked, more to myself than to Ethan. I think he was afraid, Ethan offered gently. Afraid of hurting you, afraid of admitting these feelings made him less than the perfect husband. And maybe afraid of what you'd say if he did. So my joke was what, convenient timing? An excuse to do what he'd already been considering. The thought made me sick. I don't think it's that simple, Ethan said. I genuinely believe the joke hurt him deeply, especially given his history with his parents. But I also think it gave him permission to act on feelings he'd been suppressing. I nodded numbly, trying to reconcile these revelations with the man who had sat across from me at our kitchen table just days ago, presenting me with an all-or-nothing choice as though he were the only injured party. I'm not telling you this to turn you against James, Ethan continued. Vanessa and I both care about you both. We just couldn't stand by while you potentially uprooted your entire life without knowing the full picture. After leaving Ethan, I drove aimlessly for hours, the Chicago ultimatum weighing even heavier now. The envelope James had given me sat on the passenger seat, still unopened. I'd been so consumed with guilt, so desperate to make amends, that I hadn't stopped to question whether James was being entirely honest with me. When I finally returned home, I made a decision. I called James. "We need to talk," I said when he answered. "Tonight. And this time, I need the whole truth." He was silent for a moment. "What do you mean?" "I know about the job interviews in January, James. I know you were considering moving to Chicago long before our fight." Another silence, longer this time. "Who told you?" "Does it matter?" I countered. "What matters is you've been asking me to uproot my life as penance for a joke, while hiding the fact that you'd been planning your exit for months." "It wasn't like that," he said, his voice tight. "Then tell me what it was like. In person. Tonight. I deserve that much." He agreed to come to the house at 8. Those hours of waiting were some of the longest of my life, as I rehearsed what I would say, how I would remain calm while demanding the honesty we'd both been avoiding for too long. When he arrived, the tension between us was different than before, not just the strain of a marriage in crisis, but the wariness of two people who no longer knew if they could trust each other. "Sit down," I said, gesturing to the living room couch. "And please, for once, tell me everything." James sank onto the couch, looking suddenly smaller, less certain. "I did interview for the Chicago position before our fight," he admitted. "But I wasn't planning to take it. I wanted to know if I was good enough. It was about my insecurities, not about leaving you. And you didn't think that was something to share with your wife?" I asked, fighting to keep my voice steady. "I was going to," he insisted. "If they offered me the job. I was going to discuss it with you then, as a possibility, not a certainty. Like you're discussing it now?" I challenged. "By giving me an ultimatum." He looked away. After what happened at the dinner party, I needed space. The Chicago offer was already on the table. It felt like maybe it was a sign. A convenient one, I observed. "And what about your doubts about our marriage? About getting married young? Were you ever going to share those with me?" His head snapped up, surprise evident in his expression. "Ethan told you about that too?" "Yes. And it makes me wonder what else you've been keeping from me while making me feel like I was the only one who betrayed our marriage." James ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of frustration I knew well. "Those were passing thoughts, Claire. Moments of doubt that everyone has. I didn't act on them because I love you. I chose you, every day." "Until you didn't," I said quietly. "Until you used my mistake as justification for what you'd already been contemplating." He stood up suddenly, pacing the room. "That's not fair. Your joke humiliated me, brought back my worst childhood trauma, confirmed fears I'd been fighting for years. Don't minimize that because I had a job interview." "I'm not minimizing anything," I countered. I've taken full responsibility for my words. But you've been painting yourself as the only victim here, making me believe I single-handedly destroyed our marriage with one thoughtless comment, when the truth is you'd been questioning us for years. The realization hit me then, we'd both been keeping secrets. Both avoiding difficult conversations. Both allowing distance to grow between us while pretending everything was fine. So where does this leave us? James asked, his voice softer now. Does knowing this change your decision about Chicago? I looked at my husband, this man I'd loved for a decade, this stranger I was only now beginning to truly see. The choice before me had transformed. It was no longer about sacrifice as penance for my mistake. It was about whether we could build something new on a foundation of complete honesty, something we'd never truly had. I don't know, I answered honestly. But I do know I'm done making decisions based on partial truths. If we have any chance of saving this marriage, we need to put everything on the table. All of it. No more secrets, no more protecting each other from difficult realities. James nodded slowly, the anger draining from his posture. Okay, he said simply. No more secrets. What happened next would determine not just whether our marriage survived, but whether it deserved to. As we sat down at our kitchen table for the most honest conversation of our relationship, I realized we were both terrified of what we might discover about each other and about ourselves. The night James and I finally laid bare our truths was the longest of my life. We sat at our kitchen table until dawn broke, cups of coffee growing cold between us, as we excavated 8 years of unspoken thoughts, fears, and disappointments. It was brutal and beautiful, devastating and freeing all at once. I felt invisible to you for years, James admitted, his voice hollow with exhaustion. When you started your business, you came alive in a way I'd never seen before. You were passionate, driven, excited. I was so proud of you, but I also felt left behind. Like I was no longer the most important thing in your life. The truth in his words stung. I had thrown myself into my career with single-minded dedication, often working late into the night, cancelling plans with James when clients needed me. I'd rationalized it as temporary sacrifice for long-term success, never stopping to consider how it felt to be on the receiving end of those broken promises. Why didn't you tell me? I asked. Because I was supposed to be supportive, he said with a bitter laugh. What kind of husband resents his wife's success? I was ashamed of feeling that way. And the job in Chicago? I prompted gently. James sighed, rubbing his temples. It started as just curiosity. A college friend reached out, said they were looking for someone with my experience. The more I thought about it, the more it appealed to me, and not because I wanted to leave you, but because I wanted to feel important again. Valued for my work the way you were for yours. The realization was painful. While I'd been basking in professional recognition, James had been silently drowning in a sea of inadequacy I'd never bothered to notice. My turn, I said, taking a deep breath. I've been bored. Not just with our routine, but with who we'd become together. Sometimes I'd look at you across the room and wonder what happened to the man who used to surprise me with weekend getaways, who would debate philosophy with me until sunrise, who looked at me like I was the most fascinating person he'd ever met. James flinched but nodded for me to continue. That joke. I swallowed hard. It wasn't about wanting Ethan. It was about wanting to feel something, anything, other than the comfortable numbness we'd settled into. I wanted to shock you, to make you jealous, to force some kind of reaction that would prove you still cared passionately about us. I never stopped caring, James whispered. I just stopped showing it. As night turned to dawn, we confessed other truths. How I'd flirted with a client last year, enjoying the attention even though I never would have acted on it. How James had deliberately worked late some nights simply to avoid coming home to the silence that had grown between us. How we'd both begun to wonder if love was supposed to feel this way, comfortable but uninspiring, safe but somehow hollow. When the first light of morning filtered through our kitchen window, we were emotionally drained but curiously lighter. The secrets we'd been carrying had been heavy, but not as crushing as the weight of keeping them hidden. So what now? James asked finally, his eyes red-rimmed from exhaustion and unshed tears. "Do you come to Chicago? Do we file the papers? Where do we go from here?" I looked at this man, my husband, my first love, this person I thought I knew completely who had revealed himself to be as complex and flawed and human as I was, and realized something profound. "Neither," I said quietly. His eyebrows rose in surprise. "What do you mean?" "I mean I'm not coming to Chicago as some grand gesture of penance. And I'm not signing divorce papers as an admission of defeat. Both options are about the past, about punishing or escaping what went wrong." I reached across the table and took his hand in mine. "What if we chose something else entirely? Something new?" "Like what?" he asked, but I could see a flicker of curiosity in his eyes. "Like couples therapy. Intensive, twice-weekly sessions. Like you turning down the permanent position in Chicago but finishing your current contract, 3 months where we live apart but visit each other every other weekend. Like me scaling back my business to make time for us again. That sounds..." He hesitated. "Complicated." "It is," I agreed. "But so are we. So is any marriage worth saving. And I think ours might be, if we're both willing to do the work." For the first time in months, I saw a genuine smile touch James's lips. Not the polite, distant smile he'd been offering since our fight, but something real. Tentative, but real. And after the 3 months, he asked, "We reevaluate. Together. No ultimatums, no all-or-nothing choices. We decide, as partners, what our next chapter looks like. Maybe that's you coming back here. Maybe it's me moving there. Maybe it's something we haven't even considered yet." James was quiet for a long moment, considering. "That doesn't feel like the grand romantic gesture this situation seems to call for," he admitted. I laughed softly. "Maybe that's been our problem all along. We've been waiting for grand gestures instead of doing the quiet, consistent work of choosing each other every day. Of talking even when it's hard. Of seeing each other clearly, flaws and all. In the pale light of morning, we made a new pact, not the passionate promises of our wedding day or the desperate pledges of a marriage in crisis, but something more honest. More sustainable. We would try. Not with the certainty of guaranteed success, but with the humility of two people who had glimpsed what they stood to lose. The next 3 months were the hardest of my life. Therapy sessions that left us both emotionally raw. Weekend visits that awkwardly straddled the line between dating and marriage. Long phone calls that sometimes ended in tears, sometimes in laughter, always in a deeper understanding of each other. I scaled back my client list, referring some to colleagues. James used his time in Chicago to reflect on what he truly wanted from his career, ultimately deciding that the prestige of the new position wasn't worth the sacrifice of the life we were rebuilding. For months after that fateful dinner party, James came home, not to our old house with its loaded memories, but to a new apartment we'd chosen together. A clean slate. Not an escape from our problems, but a mutual decision to create something new while honoring what we'd learned. The envelope with the divorce papers sits in my desk drawer, unsigned, a reminder of how close we came to losing everything, not because of one thoughtless joke, but because of years of avoided conversations and unspoken truths. Our marriage isn't perfect now. We still argue. We still occasionally retreat into old patterns. But when I look at James across our dinner table, I no longer see a stranger or even the familiar comfort of an old love. I see a person I'm actively choosing every day, someone I'm continuously discovering and allowing to discover me in return. The joke about swapping husbands didn't end my marriage, but it did destroy the illusion that love alone is enough to sustain one. Real partnership requires courage, the courage to be vulnerable, to admit mistakes, to voice disappointments, and to choose each other deliberately, with eyes wide open to all the flaws and complexities that make us human. If there's one thing I've learned through this painful journey, it's that sometimes the breakdown of what we thought we had creates space for something stronger to emerge. Something true. Something built not on fairy tales or comfortable routines, but on the messy, beautiful reality of two imperfect people choosing each other anyway. If you've ever stood at the crossroads of your own relationship, wondering whether to fight or surrender, to stay or go, know that sometimes the most powerful choice isn't either extreme but the harder middle path, the commitment to seeing clearly, speaking honestly, and building something new from the ashes of what was lost. Thank you for following my story. If it resonated with you, please subscribe and share your own experiences in the comments below. Because while our stories may be different, the courage it takes to face hard truths and choose love anyway connects us all.